Hello, welcome to a Q&A. Welcome back to my studio. I am so happy that you are here. It's been a little while, but here we are. So a little while ago, you may have gotten an email sent out from the Artist Academy, and a lot of you responded, and enough of you said, hey, I'd enjoy a Q&A, that here we are. I am here for you, whatever your questions may be, let's chat. I am an oil painter specifically. I know a lot of you do watercolor and acrylics, and those are not my areas of expertise, but I know enough about them, like the basics about them, that hopefully I can at least point you in a good direction. And I'm going to be very honest, like, okay, I do know this, but I don't know this. So, but again, whatever questions you may have, please feel free to ask. Just type them in the little text and I will address them, please. While we're waiting for people to kind of come in, I wanted to talk about this piece behind me. It just came back from a show recently, and it kind of has an interesting story. Let me kind of turn it so you can see it a little better. There we go. That works. I had this particular canvas for ages. It was a canvas that I had done in school, in the academy, and it was a figure study. And I always had this kind of laying around, and it was an okay figure study. And I got this frame for it, this specific frame for it. And I put it in the frame, and it went to a few shows, and it was fine. I just never really felt super happy with it. And so what I did was I got it back from the shows. I'm like, I'm not going to show this anymore. I really just am not confident in this figure study that is in this frame. And the frame is beautiful. So I want to use the frame to its full potential, right? So what I did is I let it kind of sit around the studio until I got up the courage to paint over it. And so I left it in its frame, set up a still life specifically for this frame, and painted that painting. And I'm so much happier with it now. I think that it's so much better overall. Not only the frame, it makes it look just better, but the colors within the frame are in the still life, and it works. So it just went to another show, just barely came back. Just waiting for it to not be in my studio and find its forever home one day. We'll see. Okay, so we have a question from Kayla. What is your favorite color to use as a base wash? Great question, because it kind of varies. If I am doing kind of a lighter scene, I tend to have a lighter wash. If I'm doing plein air, a lot of times I actually won't do that first initial wash. Because I want the refraction of the light from the base, from your ground, to refract through those layers of paint and have the brightest effect that it can. Now, for this sort of piece, I did do kind of a gray, brown, blue wash first. And let's see if I can kind of pull it forward so you can see. You might be able to see it right through here. It's kind of a taupey browny, and that kind of covered a lot of the canvas. But something that I like to do when I do that initial kind of wash over the canvas is I like to vary it, because obviously that initial wash kind of knocks down the white of the canvas, which is usually very desired. But if you do have areas where you do see that kind of ground wash layer, if it has a little bit more interest, a little dither, a little variety, it just adds that much more interest and that much more depth to your painting. So I do have kind of an initial color, and then every time I go back in and I kind of dip into that color, I add a little bit more blue here, a little bit more yellow here, a little bit more brown here, and it just kind of, it's a little mosaic that's going on there. I know some people do like to use just one mixture for everything they do. It's usually something a bit darker, again, gray, and it's just kind of up to you, whatever you feel comfortable working on. Some people like to use red, like a raw sienna back there. A lot of older master paintings, they feel very brown because that was the base that they had used. Was they covered the canvas with a brown color first, and then they built all their colors on top of it. So they all feel very brown. So yeah, it's all completely up to you. But the whole point is to cover the white of the canvas so that if any of the canvas does end up showing through in the final painting, you don't have these little white spots there. So I hope that answered your question. Chris asks, why does the color seem to change from my mixing palette to the painting? Another excellent question. So it depends on what color your actual palette is. So for my palette, I have a gray palette, a neutral gray palette. There are a lot of palettes out there that are white. The problem with a white palette is that you are mixing to the white, not to your painting, which will probably be farther down in the value scale color, if that makes sense. So what I like to do is have a gray palette that will allow me to mix up in my value and down in my value, so that that neutral kind of gray, that's what I'm mixing to. And then when I put it up on the canvas, then I can tweak to whatever, value my painting is. I hope that makes sense. So there are areas like in here where I am going to have brighter spots than what my palette is, right? But there are areas like in here where that value is basically the value of my palette. So I can get it pretty close, and not have to remix as much. Did that help, Chris? I hope that, yeah. So the value of the palette definitely has a huge impact on the overall perception of what you are mixing. Before I finish this question, I want to show you my big palette, if I can find it. I have a couple big palettes, wood palettes. This is one that I've had for just years. And you can see this beautiful patina. Again, it's kind of that neutral gray that just builds up and builds up and builds up with oil and color. And every time that you put your colors on here and then clean them off, it just builds up that beautiful patina. So you can see exactly where I've mixed and the patina around it, but it just has this beautiful neutral gray color that you can only really get by, the time that it takes for this to build up. But it is absolutely a perfect palette to mix on. So if you have the time, that's what I recommend. Okay. Do you ever use an acrylic underpainting as a base for an oil painting or tone a canvas with acrylic? So no, and I'll tell you why. Because I only ever have oils on hand. You totally can. That's the beauty of acrylic, right? And science, right? The oil sits on top and the water-based acrylic sits on the bottom, and there is no problem. For me personally, I don't. One, because I do prefer the way that the light refracts through the oil layers. If it hits that acrylic layer, it's more likely to just kind of stop because it's more plasticky than the oily, paint. So I never do, but you totally can. And there is nothing really wrong with that. Another thing that you can do is gesso is an acrylic base medium. I have painted on that. It's not my personal preference to paint on gesso because it absorbs a lot of oil. I don't know specifically if acrylic paint would absorb a lot of oil as well. But when that happens, it's really, really difficult to paint on top of, because it just feels like you're painting on sandpaper. It just immediately soaks up all of that oil, and you can't judge your values correctly. It's hard to actually get the paint to move on the canvas, and it's just not my cup of tea. But some people really enjoy it. And if you're painting really thickly, then it's a great way to go about it, because obviously it will dry quickly, so you can move on. So I don't, but not off the table completely. So thank you for your question, Dennis. Jess, do you have a beginner's painting book you recommend? That's a tough question for me, and I'll tell you why. I am not an avid reader. And like looking back, I have 2 young kids, and so I'm constantly reading, books to them. And I realize as a kid myself, I judged a book very heavily on the pictures, on the illustrations. And so I had clear favorites. If I liked this book and didn't like this book, it was because the illustrations in this book I really just didn't like. I'm realizing this now as an adult. And so reading these, kids' books to my kids, I am being reminded, oh, I don't like this book. It's because of the illustrations. It's not because of the story. So I don't have a specific beginning painting book to recommend. You know what? Actually, I do. I do have a beginning painting book. Sorry, let me think about that real quick. I did read it, and it is brilliant. I'll come back to that question. Where can I get that palette? Which palette do you want, Chris? Do you want this palette or the wood palette? Because this palette is Edge Pro, and this is my Edge Pro kit, and it just comes with a palette. This one is glass, and it also comes with a plastic one. But this one I had to make, so that's less available. You can get other palettes that are available, but I would recommend art palettes. They are brilliant. I have one. I don't know where it is right now, but it's huge. And it just holds so much paint. And is New Wave is great for wood palettes. I have a whole new line, I think, as well, of palettes that are available. Okay, so beginning painting book. In just a moment. I'm so sorry, Jess. I wish I had this off the top of my head. Sorry, just a moment. I see it in my head, but again, where I connect more with pictures than words, it's difficult for me to remember specifics, unfortunately. There is definitely a reason why I'm a painter and not a writer. 100%. I'm awful at words. Solomon J. Solomon, back in the day, did do a really great painting book. A lot of older, like 19th century artists, they did have a book that they wrote or referred to that was brilliant. Here we go. Harold Speed, that's the author. Harold Speed, Oil Painting Techniques and Materials. It is really affordable. I'll show you. That's what it looks like. He also has a drawing one that is also so good. It is so good. Highly, highly, highly recommend those. So hopefully that helps. Okay, do you have any tips for depth? My landscapes aren't as layered as I like them to be. Yeah, I feel that 100%. My landscapes, I tend to shy away from like big vistas because I also struggle with getting that depth. A lot of it has to do with where your horizon line is and how much forced atmospheric perspective you are putting into your painting. And what that means is how gray things in the distance are compared to how chromatic things are in the foreground. You create them. And a lot of times you will have to force the things in the background far more gray than you actually see them. So try that. Try to force a bit more gray tones into the distance of your paintings. And I think that probably automatically you will see a lot more of that depth. Another thing that you can do is it has a lot to do with edges. The softer edges in the background, right? And then the harder, crisp edges in the foreground will help a lot as well. It kind of depends on the scene though, right? But a lot of it that I've found has to do with chroma. So try that, see if it works. How do I prepare my canvas or panels? Dennis, great question. Well, I'll show you my panel that I use. I make these panels. This was the demo that I did over past, I don't know, a few months. I make these panels myself. They are incredibly labor intensive. I do not recommend that you make your own panels. Not only is it a lot of materials that you have to kind of get accustomed to, but this, from start to finish, takes at least a month before you can actually paint on a panel. So it's Baltic birch plywood with linen that I have primed with lead primer, 2 coats. I attach the linen to the board with rabbit skin glue, and yeah, it's a huge process. But if you don't want to do that, Raymar has just fantastic panels, so you don't have to go this route. It's really nice if you want to create your own surface, then it's 100% customizable, but you don't have to. So how I prepare them is I will do an initial wash over them if I need a wash, right, of some sort of color. And this one, you can kind of see that wash right through here. And it depends on what I'm actually painting. So because this was a darker scene, I did a bit of a darker kind of gray, green, bluey wash over it. I also paint on paper sometimes. Same thing is I will do a wash over it, but this is sealed with wax-free shellac. I've only ever found it online, and I think Ace Hardware had it, but I usually just get it off of Amazon. You can't get it at like Home Depot or Lowe's that I've been able to find. So this is a really great option, especially for plein air. I've been to a couple fellowships that I take just a bunch of paper instead of big panels because it's light, obviously, customizable size, and it's great. It's a great surface. I really recommend that. But yeah, just light wash and let that dry. You're good to go. So yeah, I hope that answered your question as far as preparation goes. If I do have a little bit more texture on my canvas than I want, I will take a light sandpapering to them and just kind of get the texture that I want. I tend to want a bit finer of a tooth than maybe some people do, because I paint in lighter layers, in more, not as thick layers, I guess. So if you do paint thickly, you don't really need to have a really slick surface, and in fact you probably don't want a slick surface. And there are linens that of course have a bigger tooth that will allow you to get just more paint onto the canvas, but I'm far more delicate in my layers, so I like a smoother surface. Okay, what school did I go for painting? Excellent question, Kayla. I went to a couple different schools. So I studied at a junior college right after high school, studied art, and they told me about the Florence Academy of Art. And the teacher there was just developing a figure drawing program. And so they were like small town college. And so he was just developing this, was doing a bunch of research, found the Florence Academy of Art, the Angel Academy of Art, and was showing like me and a few other students that he thought might be interested in going that way. And so I was like, yeah, I want to go there. And being young and dumb, I didn't see any reason why I couldn't, right? So I applied and I went for a trimester before running out of money. And so I came home, worked for a year and a half, went back for another couple trimesters. So I got a full year at the Florence Academy of Art. Ran out of money again, had to come back home. And that's when I started going to the Masters Academy of Art, which was opened up by an alumni of the Florence Academy of Art. I had actually met him over there. He was also a Utahn like me. And so he's like, hey, I'm going to start up a school. When I get back, you should come study, because he knew that I had to go home. So I said, okay. Again, young and dumb. I didn't see why I couldn't. So I moved to where he had opened up his school. And so I studied there for several years. And then I was the assistant director under him for several years after that. He has since closed. He closed last year, the Masters Academy of Art. The brand is still alive, but the actual school is closed. I think that COVID kind of got to him, unfortunately. So unfortunately that school is gone, but the Florence Academy is still alive and well and it's kicking it. So that's where I studied. Jess asks, how important would you say that the right brush is? Gotcha. Okay, newbie Jess. You have to put in the miles on the brush to figure out exactly what works for you. I recommend larger brushes at first and then get into the smaller brushes. The thing that starting out with smaller brushes will do is it will tend to tighten you up like a pencil, right? You have this small little brush here. Speaking of brushes, the smaller brush you get, this is actually about as small as I tend to go until I'm putting the absolute final little flicks of paint on the painting. But starting out with something like this is going to help you think more broadly and stop you from getting into every last little detail before you have the whole structure of the painting settled. Structure is everything, and this is going to help you far more than this is. You can sketch with this, you can get your initial lines down with this, but then immediately when you're laying in the painting, switch over to something bigger. Of course, this all depends on like the size of your canvas, right? So if I'm working on something this big, this may not even cut it. It's probably too small. I would probably have to go up 2-3 sizes. But if I'm working on something, like this or even smaller, there are areas where this just isn't going to work, right? So it just depends on the size of your canvas, but don't be afraid to use bigger brushes. Stick with the bigger brushes early on. They are going to make a stronger, more confident painting in the end. But again, you have to put the miles on the brush. Do all those terrible, awful, no one wants to see them paintings. And eventually you're going to get a few that are great or that are tolerable to look at or that you don't mind keeping around. And then after that, you're going to start to see some real improvement. But you have to push through. It's tough. Okay. Yes, I do use rabbit skin glue and not PVA. I have used PVA. I've done a lot of different tests when I make my panels. I've done a lot of different tests. Rabbit skin glue is the traditional glue. I know that it seems like it's not the most ethical glue, and that can 100% be argued. What I like about it is that it is reversible. It is the more traditional way of doing things. I'm having my education being far more rooted in the tradition of things. I tend to like to connect more with the tradition and seeing the quality of the materials used that were used back then, and kind of bringing them through to today. So I do use rabbit skin, and PVA has its issues. And not to say that rabbit skin glue does not have its issues, it 100% does. But PVA, I had far more issues with bubbling up and not adhering properly to the surface than I did with rabbit skin. Or with rabbit skin, if it did bubble up, if I didn't get that clean, bubble-free wrap on the linen, then I could go back in and I could fix it, where with PVA, I couldn't. So it's not a bad thing to use PVA. I just struggled with getting that good adhesion. No matter how much I put on, whatever, and how much I pressed on it, it just was never the best for me. So do what you got to do, but that's just how it worked for me. So, okay, Kayla, I'm trying to find my style right now. Is there anything you ever recommend to try out? What is my style called? I don't know. Traditional? I don't know. So with my education, like I said, I kind of grew up in a more traditional way of painting. But lately, especially, I've been really trying to find my unique voice, I guess it is. And so I've been trying to imagine ways of pushing my work farther. And that makes me nervous, because if I push something like this for however many years that I've been painting like this, to completely pivot, and you can kind of see like this one here is just a little bit, I'll pull it down. Oh, actually, this is a better example of what I'm kind of doing right now. It's just more washy, a bit more abstract. Just a bit different, right? Different composition, different handling, etc., etc. So I don't know what my style is called. My style is in transition right now. But what you need to do to find your own style, I wouldn't put a label on it, quite honestly. What I would do is learn how to draw and paint really, really well. Find something that you can latch onto, go about it whatever method that artist goes about it. Learn as much as you can from it. And then after that, then you can start to integrate other things that may catch your eye a bit more. And so right now, I keep getting, these images of like more color and more brushy, whatever, right? And that's a lot of what people are painting today, color and brushy and whatever. But I want to keep it in my current root of what I do. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, if you are trying to find your specific style, find something that you can latch onto first, extract what you can from it, and then go from there. And it will kind of just naturally come out of you, how you naturally make decisions throughout the painting. You don't have to worry about your style, because it will be you, essentially, and you don't have to think about it. So I hope that helps, Kayla. Okay. Problem with rabbit skin glue is that it reacts to humidity. Yes. which is why panels. So if you stretch canvas on stretcher bars, yes, you can get humidity going through. And, with stretched canvas in general has its issues for sure. That's why painting on panels is always the best option. It's heavier, yes. It's clunkier, yes. It's maybe not as customizable or easily customizable as stretch canvas, absolutely. But if you use rabbit skin glue on a panel, you are just not going to have that humidity issue. It is sealed from the top with the oil paint. It is sealed in the back with the board, so you're good to go. Honestly, it's really a fantastic glue to use. I have stretched canvas with rabbit skin glue. It's a little tricky. It makes a beautiful surface to paint on, though, I must admit. But I don't recommend it for stretch canvas. So hopefully that kind of clears that up. But if you have any suggestions or concerns, please continue to ask. I'm all ears, and I'm still learning a lot about this myself. Even through the experiments and time that I've put into this, there's so much to learn about materials. So much. If anyone knows of natural pigments, George O'Hanlon, the kind of creator owner of natural pigments, is he's a genius when it comes to artist materials. So if you ever want to learn more about a certain material, call him up, say, hey, I have this question about this material, and he will give you far more information than you ever thought you could get for this specific thing. And your head will be reeling, but you'll have all of the information that you need for it. So I do use him as a resource. He's brilliant. But again, it comes down to, okay, what is practical and what's easy, or what's the easiest, right? And what do I actually like to paint on? So that's why I use rabbit skin. Okay. Have I used the blackest black paint? I have not. I think it's an acrylic. So yeah, no, I haven't, but I am very curious. That is not a silly question at all, actually, because I'm very, very curious about that blackest black paint. I think that it has some interesting applications in fine artwork. I know that people have kind of used it a bit, but I want to play with it, right? I think they just came out with a whitest white. I know that there was the pinkest pink that just doesn't intrigue me as much, but the whitest white and blackest black do definitely intrigue me. So not a silly question. Yes, Robert Gamblin does recommend painting on panels. Thank you for pointing that out, Dennis. All of the materials guys are going to tell you, for longevity's sake of your painting, panels is 100% the best way to go. Stretched canvas, it just breaks down. And going through a museum and seeing like old paintings that maybe are cracked, or maybe have some linseed oil cracking, whatever, it's not great. It's unfortunate, really, because there are some beautiful masterpieces that have been painted on stretch canvas that they cannot hold up. So paint on panels whenever possible. Paint on panels. And if I am painting on paper, if I want to keep this around for a while, if it turns out really nice, paper is not inherently a bad surface to paint on, as long as it's sealed properly, right? With the shellac, then what you can do is just stick it on a board, just glue it on board, and you're good to go. You can frame it just like that. But yes, panels are key to longevity, 100%. Okay, Jess, where can I get inspiration for what scene to paint? Interesting question. I am inherently a still life artist, so I get inspiration from what to paint from like going to the thrift store, right? Or I guess an antique store. and finding little doodads. I'll show you. It's a little messy, but I'll show you. This is where all of my still life items live, right in here, right in here. I have that still life still up. So I find items that just kind of call to me. When you're out painting a scene, what kind of speaks to you? It's probably going to have a lot of information that you're going to have to sort through. So you have to potentially take that into consideration when you sit down to paint a scene. But is it the big vistas that speak to you? Is it the small, intimate scenes that kind of speak to you? I'll show you what I tend to paint when I'm painting plein air. These were done at the Hudson River Fellowship several years back. I did some tree root studies. So there's tree roots and rocks. I apparently have a thing with tree roots. I have several of them laying around, but this was a little stream scene. It's really, really pretty. That little stream was right next to a natural pond in the forest, and my painting partner and I had wandered in. It's like a mile away from where we were staying, and we're like, let's go swimming, right? So we went swimming, brought a bunch of people back that night and said, hey, this is a great swimming hole, let's go swim, after everyone was done painting for the day. So we did. Apparently it was just riddled with leeches, so oops. But anyway, that's fine, that's totally fine. Let's see if you can see up here. Those are a bunch of my plein air paintings. There's not a whole lot of vistas. I mean, some of them, right? This one, that one in particular, was more focused on the sunrise than it was the vista. That one is the Grand Tetons. That, of course, had to be the vista, right? But you can see just like stream, little barn scene. Let's see what we got over here. Little church scene, little Swiss little scene. It was super pretty. That's Zion's Canyon. That had to kind of be a vista. So it depends on where you're painting and what you're interested in. There's no wrong answers, honestly. One of my friends from the Hudson River Fellowship, she's kind of brilliant. I had never thought before I met her, but she picks a spot in the ground and just paints all of the grass and twigs and leaves and flowers and whatever. And it's this really intricate, cool way of approaching a plein air that I had never thought about. So honestly, no wrong answers. What speaks to you? What kind of calls like, ooh, I like that. And that's all it has to be. Ooh, I like that. I could stare at that for a few hours. So what brand of shellac do I use? It's the Zissner shellac. I wonder if I have any around. It's not anything special. It is just kind of what's available at on Amazon, right? But at Ace, it's the same stuff, and it's just the Zissner, I think, shellac. So nothing fancy, but it does need to be de-waxed. Just make sure that it's de-waxed shellac, and the regular shellac that you can get just kind of anywhere, that has wax in it. So do not use that, because the paint layers will have the potentiality to delaminate from the shellac. So very important, de-waxed. Okay, Karen. I work a lot from photos, and when doing a portrait or animal, I run across enlargement of hands or other body parts that are closer to the camera. Yes. Good eye, good perception. Is it just a matter of guessing, or is there a way to be more accurate? For one, better photo references. So you're probably, snapping photos probably the phone actually nowadays. And you're not really thinking about that. And then you go back later, ooh, I like that. And then of course you have that camera distortion, right? So training your eye more will help you not only avoid those issues by stepping back and having the camera farther away from your subject, and then of course you can alter that in like Photoshop or whatever. You could zoom in and get the exact composition that you want, or you have your picture ready to go and just understanding, okay, well, I need to shrink this down, and understanding the anatomy is going to be huge in that case, right? But it really will benefit you to get just better references. That is a huge problem, honestly, with a lot of painters that are using photo references, is that the distortion of the camera is a very, very real thing. And you just have to take that into account when using that tool. I don't dissuade you at all from using a camera. I know that there are some people that are gung-ho, only from life, never anything else people. I'm not like that at all. Any tool that you have to help you create the paintings that you want to create, do it 100%. But just know that every tool has its advantages and its drawbacks. So really understanding those drawbacks of photos is key in using them properly. Not only will they distort, but they will also compress your values. So you're losing a lot of the nuance that you would get in life, because the pixels, they're just not enough, right, to get all of the information that you see with your eyes in digital form. So hopefully that helps. I'm sorry, there's not an easy answer for that, honestly. It is what it is. You just have to get better at photographing your subjects. So try to be aware of it next time you are photographing, and try to adjust for it. And every time you take it back in to paint it, you're going to see just little adjustments that, shoot, I wish I would have done that. I do that all the time, honestly. Like when I have a model in front of me and I take a bunch of reference photos, and I can go back through and say, okay, well, I like the hand placement of this, but I like the head tilt of this one. And getting that specific pose immediately is kind of impossible, right? So I take a bunch of photos, take what I like from those photos, all the elements I like from those photos, have the model back, take a bunch more photos in the position that I like, and then I can use those better. Hopefully that helps. Chris asks, having trouble making something look transparent. Is there a color tip? Making it lighter doesn't seem just right. Transparency. I have a painting back here. Maybe it isn't the best. It used to be, but then I painted over the thing that made it transparent. If you can see right here, I'll move my head so that the white balance, there we go. Okay, so right here, there's a vase with some water in it. And I toiled over that painting for ages, and I just don't like it at all, but whatever. Yeah, it's tough. It has more to do with the values around the object than it has to do with the object. It's really is a value issue more than anything. So if your values are incorrect, if they're not playing well together, then you're not going to be getting the visual effect that you're going to want in the final piece. So what I recommend is you step back from the piece. If you're painting from life, then squint down at the reference, or if you're painting from photograph, that works too. Squint down, like really squint down, and compress those values into light and dark. You'll see maybe a little bit of gray in there, but it will be really just light and dark. And you'll be able to kind of see, is my painting representing my reference properly with that distinction of light and dark. And then you can open your eyes just a little bit more. Are my grays working properly within those lights and darks? The thing with your values is you do have your lights family and your darks family, and your lightest dark will never be as light as your darkest light. Hopefully that makes sense. So let me say that again. So your lightest dark will never be as light as your darkest light. So there does have to be a separation of your families, and they need to play together. Unfortunately, they are segregated 100% in order for your values to have a proper system of hierarchy and being able to have the desired effect of visual effect that you want in your paintings. So hopefully that helps. Try it, give it a go, see if it helps. Which is the best way to protect your paint in a tropical environment? Ooh, interesting. I'm curious, Carlos, what issue are you having in your paint? Is it just the humidity, or is it just like the paint itself? What sort of medium are you using? Is it acrylic or oil, or yeah, I need a little bit more information, Carlos, to kind of answer that. Okay. Yes, Chris, you can absolutely take off your glasses and blur it. So here's a funny story from when I was in Florence. I didn't have my glasses yet, and I was in kind of the area of the figure room. We were doing our, daily figure drawing, and I was in kind of a corner, which backing up wise was great, but for where I was in the figure room, I couldn't actually see really a whole lot of what was going on with the model. So in the initial lay-in of the light and dark, it was perfect. But once I had to move beyond that, I couldn't see. I physically could not see what was going on. And so the teacher would come around and critique me and be like, well, why aren't you getting this? And I'd be like, I didn't know that was there. That's why. So it's a really great tool. I have my glasses now. I kind of go back and forth. So it's actually a really great tool to have just slightly bad eyes. It's not a hindrance at all. Okay. Your still life on the easel is magnificent. Thank you very much. Beautifully framed. It's perfect, right? That frame is perfect for that painting. I'm actually really pleased with that painting because of the frame. So the frame was 100% the inspiration for that painting, but I really enjoy that painting a lot. And it's frustrating because it's been to so many galleries and everyone's like, I have so much interest in that painting, and is that the sale price, whatever, so I get a lot of feedback for it, and it's still, here it is. It's back in my studio. It's fine. I like looking at it, but okay, Dennis, I want to make sure that I've gotten this correctly. Your lightest darks, yes, will never be as light as your darkest lights. Yes. Let me see if I can. I know one of the PDFs on our live stream, I did a value, like a 9-step or whatever, value grid scale. That's the word I'm looking for. Scale. I don't have one here in my studio, but if you have your dark family, that's going to go from like a 9 or 1 or whatever it is, from one extreme to probably about halfway up the scale. And then your light's going to start at the next value up and go all the way to the other extreme. But there has to be that clear separation. So if you have like a reflected light in your shadow, it cannot be as light as your direct light on the subject. So be very aware of that. Now, a reflected light can be really bright. It absolutely can. But in the visual kind of communication, is it working? If you put it as bright as you see it or as you perceive it, is it giving the right feeling of being reflected light? Is it, giving that overall correct visual statement in your piece? Hopefully that helps, Dennis. Yeah, these are huge factors in the overall success of your work, honestly. Value has so much to do with it, not color. Color is really subjective. You can mess around quite honestly with most color. But if your values are wrong, it's going to feel absolutely wrong. So get your values working, and then you can get your colors. Okay, last questions. I thank you so much, honestly, you guys, for all of your questions. I hope this has been helpful. If you want more Q&As in the future, please let us know. I am, again, open for, well, what do you got? And I hope that I've been able to thoroughly answer these questions. If you ever do have questions in the future, I know that the premium members are able to kind of ask me directly specific questions. That's always an option. Or shoot me an email. I don't know if I should say that, but I'm here for you guys. I really am here for you guys. I'm going to be honest with what I do know and what I don't know, but I think that even the things I don't know specifically, I have resources that I can look up and give you a more thorough answer, perhaps. So I hope that this is a good thing for you, and I hope that it helps you in your work. It looks like maybe no more questions. Okay. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. Those were really fantastic questions. And good